Bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum bum.
Welcome to the Reimagined Payments podcast hosted by the Amazon Payment Services. My name is Peter George. I lead Amazon Payment Services for Middle East and North Africa. Through this podcast, we aim to bring about a bunch of conversations with thought leaders and industry leaders from the Middle East to talk to you about the payment landscape and the trends that are actually shaping the payment landscape. These leaders are at the pivot and the forefront of such changes, and today I have with me one such leader from the industry as well. Before I talk to you any further about what my guest does, I do have to take a step back to talk about how I interacted with him and his company over the last couple of years. I've not been too long in Dubai. I've shifted to Dubai in about a year and a half ago. And I think in one of my expeditions across the malls in Dubai, I love shopping and I love going to retail stores just to look at retail formats, look at what's happening in the retail space as such. I was approached by this very enterprising young lady who was wearing a uniform of a company that I did not know of as much at that time. And she asked me in a very unintrusive manner if I shopped. And I said I was looking for something for my house over here. And she said, have you thought about how you're making transactions? I said, I'm going to use my credit card and pay with my credit card. And she then said, have you thought about breaking your credit card payment into forms of installments? And I said, hey, what's this all about? But given that I'm an old salesperson myself, I wanted to kind of entertain her conversation a little further. And I kept talking to her a little more. And that's when she told me about the name of this company. And I said, and she went on to say, have you thought about breaking your payments into 4 forms of payments? And it was a very engaging conversation, right? And that was the first time I started hearing of this company. And I said, I must check it out. And she told me there's an app and I could shop on it and so on and so forth. And I played around with it. So that was my first engagement.
So I did not know the story.
And that was the first engagement with your company. And the second engagement, of course, Hussam, was when we had you over to our office and I met with you about a year ago. And without much ado, my guest today is none other than Hussam Arab, the CEO and co-founder of Tabby. Tabby is the be-all and end-all, and maybe the standard, for lack of other words, for what's now referred to ubiquitously as BNPL, or Buy Now, Pay Later. And Buy Now, Pay Later, for those who don't know about it or don't know of Tabby, stands for short-term financing, where consumers can opt to defer their payments for a particular product over a certain period of time. Before I introduce Hussam any further, Hussam, thank you once again for making time to come over. It's as always fun to see you again. I know we started talking when we were outside as well. I know you've just come back from a break, and I know you must be getting in the middle of all your work again. But it's super fun to kind of meet up.
Thank you.
It's always good fun to meet you. For those who don't know Hussam, while he sits very calmly and quietly like a sage of sorts over here, when he's in action, he's full of energy, he's full of ideas, and he's bustling with energy. And that's like a latent energy that's kind of in this man, but he also kind of comes across as a bit of a Zen master as well, of sorts as well.
I need to play that balance.
But Hussam is very well known in the space in the UAE and in the region as well as being a serial entrepreneur. He was the co-founder and the CEO of Namshi in 2011, and then co-founded and now is a CEO of Tabby over here as well. And both the companies that Hussam has actually worked on and founded, and before that as well, have gone on to become huge successes. And I do wish you well in all that awaits you and Tabby in the days ahead.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
But again, it's great to have you here, Hussam, and it's awesome to kind of connect again in this particular forum rather than at the offices talking about stuff we do together.
Less confrontational.
I hope our conversations are confrontational. But listen, Hussam, this is your Tabby. Is Tabby your second venture, or have you been
So I wouldn't call myself a serial entrepreneur yet. I would imagine serial is at number 3 onwards. But
Okay.
but yeah, it's my second venture.
Got it.
Namshi was my first foray into entrepreneurship.
Okay.
It was an 8-year journey that I thoroughly enjoyed.
Okay.
But I felt that I still had a bit more in me, and it was a time for Tabby.
Yeah, so I actually the manner in which I visualized this conversation today, Hussam, was actually one to try and use and tap into your intellect, of course, and your thoughts about how entrepreneurship should be looked at within the region. Second, of course, to talk about BNPL, and third, the future for BNPL and the entire fintech space as such, and your points of view about it. But let's talk about you first. And so, what got you into the entrepreneurship journey as such? As in, you come from a family of entrepreneurs?
No, not at all. No.
So, how do you get into this?
Yeah, I think it was honestly just I tried a little bit of everything and didn't enjoy much of it. And it sort of was one of the last resorts that I needed to attempt and see if I enjoyed, in all honesty. Right. So I graduated as an engineer.
Okay.
Worked in engineering for a little while.
Interesting.
Wasn't the most excited about it. I moved into private equity.
Oh, cool.
Did that for a little while, and did some advisory work. And in all those instances, I didn't really find myself really fulfilled, really motivated. And so thought maybe the issue was internal rather than external. And I thought maybe I should try and go at it myself. Namshi was, as I mentioned, my first attempt at entrepreneurship. It was the very early days of e-commerce in the region, as you can remember.
Very true.
When we were starting, there was Souk in play, and Souk had scaled quite nicely in the region.
Sure.
But outside of that, there wasn't much else, right? And so it fell into my lap. It was a space that I had used as a consumer while I was in the US. So, shopping online, Zappos at the time was starting to gain prominence, which is an Amazon company
now. Yep.
And honestly, we thought something similar could be quite relevant for this market. Consumers everywhere seek convenience, and if we're able to offer them the same level of convenience.
And this is Namshi. Namshi is a lifestyle selection, fashion
play. Yeah.
But how do you choose in fashion? As in, fashion is so personal, isn't it? You really want to try things out, but you chose a line which is so difficult as well.
Yeah, again, right. I think the view at the time was it was something I tried, right? That's something I tried and enjoyed. The opportunity was quite clear. With fashion, it is a lifestyle play. It is a market in which consumers enjoy and value what they wear and how they look like. And we thought this could be quite relevant for the market. Now, at the same time, we were also getting a lot of pushback from retailers in the market saying, people like to go to the malls in the region, right? And,
for sure.
and they do, right?
You see it all,
So, that was a pushback. A lot of the objections we got were just around, this market is different. Consumers might not want to test it out. And at the beginning, it was a bit of a challenge, right? How do you get a customer that is used to one form of shopping to start to take that risk online? Some of the things that we needed to solve for were to just make sure that experience was extremely smooth and take the risk away from that customer in the sense that, returns needed to be free and easy. Deliveries need to be free and easy. But it was definitely a challenge, right? It was a 8-year journey in which we were trying to change customer behavior.
Very true. No, that's what's fascinating about, at least when I look at the industry, and or at least the line that you were in, Namshi, being lifestyle, it's super challenging to change consumers' behaviors, to shop from physical stores to shop online for something as personal as clothing.
Yeah.
And then you guys were super successful at doing this. So, but if I'm sure you made mistakes and learned on the way. So if you had a word of advice for new and upcoming budding entrepreneurs, what would your advice be? As in, that if you could summarize any of them.
Yeah, listen, I mean, for Namshi particularly, and I guess for what we're doing here at Tabby, consumers as a whole value convenience, right? Consumers globally value convenience. I don't think there's a set of consumers that don't see that as important to them. And if you are providing that in a seamless manner, then you are addressing an opportunity that
Got it.
you could go after. We see this the same way with Tabby, right? At the end of the day, consumers had an option in this part of the world, which is to pay for their purchases in cash. That's what they preferred. Was it the most convenient? Absolutely not. And so our goal was, can we provide consumers with an alternative that is a lot more convenient to them?
Interesting.
And it is an opportunity that is sizable enough that we wanted to go after. And so, when I think about opportunities as entrepreneurs to go after, if you're really trying to force a solution into a problem that doesn't exist, it's a very, very big challenge to go
Exactly,
to
right?
solve
Yeah.
for. In both Namshi and Tabi, I think the opportunity was fairly clear ahead of us. There is a lack of convenience and a lack of alternatives for the consumers in this market. And if we can provide them with something that is better, then the opportunity is worth going after.
So would it be wrong on my part to say you created the opportunity and then found a convenient way to kind of address that opportunity and you kind of wow consumers with it? Is that a good way to kind of summarize?
You come from e-commerce. You saw all our attempts at e-commerce players to try to move people away from cash into digital payments, and most of them failed, right? We tried incentives in the form of discounts at checkout. They only last as long as those incentives are there.
Very true.
We tried disincentives, i.e. giving, adding a cost to cash payments, and consumers still went for that and opted for that.
Sure.
And so, I think what we were trying to do as an industry wasn't working.
Correct.
And so we needed to look at it from the outside in and say, can we provide with consumers with enough value and enough of a reason to switch their behavior and get them to ditch what is a really inconvenient solution that they had available.
Super cool. So this actually reminded me about an old quote from one of Bezos's books, which is where he goes on to say that consumers are divinely discontent, and it's up to us to find that form of addressing that discontent.
Absolutely.
And I think that's exactly what you're referring to. Would you resonate with that?
No,
as well,
absolutely.
Hussam?
Right. It was they were discontent, but they were content to continue doing what they were doing, what was available to them.
Yeah.
But the second that you offer them something that's better, they're very quick to adopt it, right? And especially in this market where I think our consumer is very switched on. They're very tech savvy. They're young. They're willing to try things.
Yeah.
And again, we saw it in e-commerce where in the early days, there were a lot of question marks, a lot of debate on whether this made sense and whether you could you were really solving a problem. But once consumers adopted it, it became the preferred way to shop
For sure.
for consumers in the region. And I think right now it's very much the same way with payments. Early on, consumers were worried placing their cards on checkout. There was just that apprehension of doing that. But the second you give them enough reason to do it and enough value in the form at Tabi of free installments at checkout, then they will adopt it and they will try it and they'll talk about it.
Got it. Cool. And one more point, Hussam, is that given that you run successful companies, I mean, Namshi was super successful before you went down to get the work on Tabi, and Tabi is on its way to becoming another blockbuster. It is a blockbuster success, in my reckoning at least.
Thank you.
And all kudos to you and your team and your hard work. But how do you keep a close eye on the evolving needs of consumers? Because yes, it's absolutely right to spot an opportunity and go in, but then the consumer, like I said, is divinely discontent. They keep changing every day, right? They're fickle from that perspective, and rightfully so. How do you keep an eye on that?
Yeah, I think it's very, very spot on, right? What we ensure we don't do at Tabi is rest on our laurels and accept that we've solved it right now. I think it's very, very important that we realize that we're on one part of a multi-step journey. We've addressed one pain point for the consumer, but the consumer has many areas in which we would need to solve and address, and we're always looking for what more we can do for that customer. Right. So initially it was around just providing an alternative to cash.
Yeah.
Now it is about providing a source of credit that is lacking in the region. Right. In the region, we have one of the lowest credit penetration rates globally, despite the fact that it is a very highly banked population. And then we're looking at areas like payments and so on. How do consumers pay for their everyday purchases?
Correct.
So there is a lot that we believe we can do. I think if we sit back and say we've addressed the problem fully by providing a payment method that sits at checkout, we're putting ourselves at risk.
You would not be relevant soon as well.
Exactly. Absolutely,
right? And that's what's interesting, because ever since we started engaging about a year ago, and the work that we do together on Amazon and Tabi as well, I've been following the Tabby evolution, so to speak, and how you have been at the forefront of so many different innovations. And it's clear to me that your team and you guys definitely keep a very close eye on what's happening in the consumer, and then you work backwards from the pain point that the consumer is going through and then address it as well. But let's talk about Tabby now, Hussam, as well. First of all, why Tabby? Why the name Tabby? As in, is there a story behind there as well?
Yeah. So the funny story is I did a bit of a survey
Okay.
to a bunch of friends with a list of names, and I asked people to vote, and Tabby came last.
Okay.
But it was something that I personally, personally bought into, the fact that we are creating a digital tab for
Sure.
the consumer for their everyday purchases. That's what we wanted to go after. That was a kind of long-term goal. And the Y at the end is in Arabic, it means it belongs to me. So it's my tab.
Okay.
And it worked, right? It was short, catchy. Definitely not that popular in the initial vote, but I think people clung onto it.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's all over the place, and everybody knows. That's as I mentioned in the beginning. It's like back in the day when photocopying became Xerox.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the BNPL is now Tabby over
That's
here.
what we're hoping for.
Oh, good for you, and good for the team over there as well. And I truly like the folks I've met with at your team as well. They're all really committed to kind of making a change, and Tabby seems to be the brand over there.
Amazing.
But why BNPL? Why this industry? Because you shifted all the way from fashion, online fashion, to this. And what's the motivation for you there?
Yeah, so I think it also goes back to my pre-Namshi days, where when I do something for a certain amount of time, I kind of want to move on and switch gears.
Okay.
And that was the case with.
But something as dramatic as fashion all the way to.
I was very clear that I did not want to do fashion e-commerce again. And so
It looks like there was some scar. You sound scarred over there.
that's it. I think too many war stories to talk about. But payments was something that, again, right? Like you look at the problems in our market.
Sure.
There were twofold for e-commerce. One was logistics, which a number of players attempted to solve for, and payments was the other. I was a lot more excited about payments. I thought I saw a much bigger opportunity there going forward, and so that's what we wanted to go after. Having said that, where we are today is we're coming back to our roots somehow. So we've just launched our Tabby shop, which is our first kind of attempt into offering consumers a marketplace.
Yep.
But that's also honestly come from just tracking our consumer behavior and seeing that the customers were coming back to the app in order to discover where else they can shop.
Sure.
Where else can they use Tabby? They like the payment so much, they want to use it elsewhere. And so we started providing consumers with a list of merchants that we worked with. Consumers were spending a bit more time on that app, and we said, okay, why not just pull in the products from these merchants and allow consumers to shop, browse, discover directly from the app, and then go out to the merchant and complete the transaction there.
So you redirect the consumer.
We redirect the customers back to the merchant's sites. That's where they complete the transaction. But if we can provide them with a platform in which they can compare products across merchants and do a lot more of their discovery on our app, then we're providing a solution for the consumers, but we're also providing a very clear solution for the merchants that we work with. Right? Our partners are starting to see us as much more than just a payment method.
Got it.
We're a source of traffic. We're a source of very high intent traffic.
High intent traffic as well.
Right?
Sure.
These are consumers that are sitting on our app in order to shop. And so once we drive that traffic to the merchant, the likelihood of conversion is much higher than any other marketing platform that they would use.
Sure, it is. And I've seen this across as well, all the way from where I work out to one of my favorite brands, and I don't know if I should be taking retailer names and such, is a big endorser of your of Tabby as such. And one of the first times I shopped on that particular website, Tabby popped up, and I tried using it, and it's such an easy interface. I love my Tabby experience, to be honest. It's Onas. Onas it's one of my favorite. One of my favorite websites over here as well. I love shopping on Onas, and I buy a lot of stuff from Onas, and Tabby is my favorite form of payment on us as well. And Muge at ONAS and I spoke as well a few months ago as well, and she spoke about the same ease of payment. So what do you think is driving this, Osam? As in, we see Tabby proliferating. There are other BNPL players in the region as well coming along, loud and strong. What's driving this? What's the core behavior that consumers seem to be suddenly tapping into? That you're creating a market for sure, but at the same time you also are enjoying a market as well. So what's happening?
Yeah, I think there's two types of consumers that we seem to be solving for. One is a consumer that is actually a credit seeker, right? They are a customer that requires a form of credit that they otherwise don't have access to, and therefore, they want to transact. They have needs and requirements, and these are the customers that are using us in order to bridge a cash flow gap.
Got it.
Right. So that's a set of consumers that kind of needs
So
the solution.
call them credit-starved customers?
Credit seekers, right?
Credit seekers, okay.
Let's put it that way, right? They don't have alternatives.
Got it.
And so they're using their debit cards in order to transact on Tabby. There is another form of consumers that, want to shop and they're able to shop. However, they're much more comfortable shopping if a solution like ours exists. Right? I want to buy that Prada bag, and it's not that convenient for me to splash out that money all in one go. So I'm much more likely to do that if I have a seamless or a solution that allows me to spread my payment over a period of time.
Sure.
Right. So they don't necessarily need the cash. They have it, but they're much more comfortable making that transaction.
Will these be value conscious? Is it value that they seek?
I think it's. I would put them as convenience seekers.
Convenience seekers.
So there's the credit seeker.
Credit seekers and the convenience seekers as well.
Is how we split them. I would say the large majority of the consumer base is a credit seeker, especially if you look at Saudi Arabia, where the banks are a lot more conservative. In the UAE, it's more heavily tilted towards credit seekers as well. Again, there is a portion of consumers that the banks are not willing to serve. And however, they're very creditworthy. Right? They are consumers that have a salary. They're able to manage their finances. They just are living on paycheck to paycheck.
Got it. But is that what differentiates BNPL in this region, Hussam? Because when I look at BNPL or buy now, pay later companies around the world, and a lot of them aren't doing as well, and but you seem to be bucking the trend, for lack of other words. And touch wood, I hope it continues completely. And I keep hearing of Tabby going from strength to strength in this region. Is it something specific of this region that drives BNPL so much?
So I think there is definitely nuances to this region that help the product work better and make it a lot more relevant and a lot more attractive. And specifically, it is around penetration of credit.
We did this study. It's the first study that we did, these white papers at Amazon Payment Services. The first study is the one in green over there, which stands for what's next for digital payments. But the next one, which is the one beside it, it says understanding the Gen Z. And we're talking about Gen Z consumers. These are folks who were born post 1995 and 1990 and that region onwards. So maybe in their early 30s or late 20s and so on and so forth is how we define the Gen Z population. And we see a great affinity for those folks with Tabby and BNPL and such as well. These are not old timers as such who don't have that much disposable income in their hand. They're still up and coming in their careers. What do you think is making Tabby and BNPL such a big affinity driver for them?
So these are consumers that are very savvy. They're very aware. They are aware of the traps that falling into credit traps is becomes a challenge. Okay. And they're very averse to taking on traditional credit just because of the lack of transparency that exists within that sector. Right?
Sure.
Once you miss a payment on a credit card, you're falling into potentially very perpetual debt that is quite painful and difficult to get out of. And so these are the consumers that are less likely to get a credit card, and they're and then they like just the fact that they are able to manage very clearly their debts with a buy now pay later solution. Right? It's very clear what you owe. It's very clear what the outcome of a missed payment is. Where our model actually works because consumers pay back. The model of credit cards works because consumers revolve.
Yeah.
Right? And so
they have challenges of paying back.
and so consumers, and especially the Gen Zs, I think the ones that are averse to credit see this as a very powerful solution for them to address their needs. However, without falling into some of the traps that some of their older peers may have fallen into.
That's super interesting, because this is the second instance in this conversation here right now, Hussam, that you're talking about a few fundamentals which differentiate your thought process, and maybe Tabby's is defined that way, from others in the e-commerce, in the industry, not e-commerce, in the industry of payments, right? You spoke initially about serving the credit seeker, who are credit, I use the word credit starved. I would perhaps say credit underserved.
Sure.
And you serve them. And here you're now talking about tapping into the Gen Z population, who are not looking at revolving their credit lines as much as looking at cleaner forms of credit, and where they have everything seamless and it's all upfront and straight. It's interesting that you're playing in the light and not in the shadows as such, which has been actually the definition of credit as such, right? Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think a large part of the success of credit in the past has been just the opacity of that product.
Exactly, right? Which is that? Do you think I'm still trying to narrow down on how Tabby is so successful? I love. By the way, like I said, all power to you, and more power to you as well, because we're partners, and hopefully we'll do it together.
I think it just comes back to do we want to be a fly by night success, or do we want to build something that is sustainable and we can just live by and continue to grow.
Yeah.
And I think the way that we do that, and just like you guys at Amazon, is serve the consumer first. Look at the pains and the needs of the consumer first. And if the only way we make money is by our consumers failing, then we make money for the short term. But I just don't know if we're able to sustain that.
Exactly. That's a very sad way of looking at things as well, right? I mean, that's what I like about what you just said, is that you operate in the light and operate clean in the light. And
it's essential.
It's essential. And that's how you kind of build a sustainable company that kind of keep going for the long term. One, you look for the opportunity, you do it right, do it clean, do it seamless, like you said. And I'm hoping that entrepreneurs who are listening to you at least kind of take this as a big takeaway, at least. I mean, at least in this conversation, this has been a big takeaway for me, at least. In the manner in which you kind of think about it, is operating in the light, operating clean, operating seamless, and then it sustains and then keeps going on. That's brilliant. And that's a great insight. Thank you, Sam. But you spoke a little earlier as well about the B2B, the businesses behind it all. We spoke a lot about consumers. You also said you also help businesses as well with the Tabby shop and so on and so forth. What's your thought process there? Is that you were an enabler for them earlier. Now, are you trying to enable them even further? What's your thinking?
Very similar to how we're trying to build a long-term relationship with the customer. We also want to build a long-term relationship with the merchant, where we don't commoditize ourselves. With the merchant initially, and I go back to e-commerce, it was a real pain point for us to deal with cash. Right, consumers utilize it, but it was a pain point because, one, it was costly. Two, returns were quite high. Right, consumers had the option of returning a product up until the point it reached their door, and then from a cash flow perspective, it was extremely painful as well, because we'd pay or the customer would pay the courier would transfer the funds internally. The funds would get to us 2 weeks later. So it breaks the cash flow model of e-commerce, where in e-commerce you're getting the cash first and then you're delivering to the customer. Here we're delivering to the customer and getting the cash 2-3 weeks later, right? So that was one of the first pain points we wanted to address for the merchant. Pain point number 2 is, so you have, as any e-commerce provider, significant drop-off at the point of checkout. Consumers have that uncertainty of putting their card in, just going through with the transaction. And if we can reduce that friction by providing consumers with a free form of cash flow, then you're likely to keep more and more of these customers within your funnel. And so, what we essentially showed them is you're able to convert that traffic that you're spending so much money to drive to your website, convert them a lot more efficiently. And so that was step number 2. Step number 3 is, can we get these customers to keep coming back to you because of the existence of this solution? Now with the solution spreading out further and further, it becomes a bit of a must-have for merchants. and a bit of a competitive edge, right? If I'm buying an iPhone, I want to make sure that the iPhone seller that I buy this from has a form of payment that is convenient for me,
Makes sense.
right? And so, as we check those boxes, I think a lot of the solutions we were providing started also to be provided by others, right? And what we want to make sure is we're not providing a commodity product. And where that really started to matter right now is with us being able to drive real high intent, high conversion traffic to these merchants. This becomes a very difficult mode to come by because you require scale in order to do that. Right?
Yep.
You're not going to be able to drive meaningful volume and meaningful traffic to your partners if that scale did not exist.
Got it. So the Tabby shop is built from that perspective, redirecting traffic, creating a new form of traffic for these merchants of yours, sending them super high intent consumers, and of course you know these consumers really well as well, given that they transact through. Awesome. So this becomes a win-win for them, right? But not only are you providing credit for their consumers, but you also are sending them new consumers as well through these forms. And
over time, obviously, as you said, we know a lot about these customers.
Absolutely.
We know what they bought, where they bought it from.
Correct.
And we're able to show them products that that mean something to them. That these are products that they have looked at in the past, would have considered buying, and therefore it becomes a much more personalized shopping experience for these consumers as we build more and more of a persona for them.
For sure. No, I can easily see that happening because you obviously, for example, like I said, I transact on Tabby, I transact using Tabby, and I'm pretty sure that you would end up sending information about me to a merchant I'm shopping on, say Onas again, then show or inform Onas to show me products that I might actually be inclined to buy even further, and therefore make it more efficient. Like
it's a good idea. We're not there yet.
But speaking of which, tell me how that plays out for you as well, Hossam, because you are the cutting edge of technology as well. How does artificial intelligence, large language models, and how does that play in your space? Because I'm guessing this is all about risk mitigation. At the end of it all, like we were talking before we came in, it's all about risk mitigation, right? Absolutely. You have a risky consumer, you can lose it all over there. You have a really good consumer who you don't lose money on, you win as well.
Very, very, very true, right? In our view, consumers as a whole have good intents, right? Have good intentions. We assume most consumers are shopping with us in order to pay us. However, there are bad actors out there.
For sure.
And these bad actors are always looking for ways to take advantage of any holes that they identify in the system. So it is very, very important for us to ensure that we are assessing the risk of each customer at the point of checkout to manage our risk accordingly, right? This is a very, very low margin business.
Very true.
And small hits when it comes to bad actors could be quite painful. And so, no, absolutely. We're using a lot of machine learning in building out the models that are there to assess the behavior of the customer at the point of checkout. What are bad actors doing in order to, and how do they shop, and how do they end up transacting versus the typical consumer and how their behavior differs. So quite important for us. It is at the end of the day, it is a credit business, and therefore risk assessment is either makes or breaks it.
Absolutely. And would you think this becomes another differentiator for Tabby vis-a-vis other entities over here in terms of the manner in which you manage risk and using data to kind of manage risk as well?
It's essential. Given the low margin nature of this product, you need to get your models spot on, and you need to constantly be reassessing these models
and evolving,
and tweaking them. And so, there's also something to think about, which is as a buy now pay later player or any other credit player, you're trying to balance growth and risk at the same time.
True.
Right? And so you don't want to overcorrect on risk, because that affects your approval rates.
Absolutely.
Affecting your approval rates slows you down, but also is not something that your merchant partners are too happy about. Right? Our merchant partners are using us in order to improve the conversion. Once we start to impact that negatively, there's no need for us at the point of checkout. So it's a very difficult balance to strike.
Very true.
Between ensuring that we have healthy approval rates and we're adding value to the merchants, and ensuring that the risk is within control.
Absolutely. I mean, a very old analogy that I think it was my dad who told me this was you can never press the brake and the accelerator of the car at the same time. It's either
Very
the
true.
brake or the accelerator, right? And what you're talking about, risk and growth, is exactly that.
Absolutely.
It's either brakes or the accelerator. You can't do both. But you have to kind of figure out the balance, otherwise you go buying something else, the other. But a little earlier, when you spoke about growth and risk as well, Hossam, we're seeing a tremendous traction for buy now, pay later in all around this region. But you also spoke about consumers who are not credit served yet, financial inclusion. Is that a calling that you guys are trying to address? And is that why you see traction in countries like in Saudi, where credit card penetration is not as deep, or Egypt for that matter, and other countries in this region where credit cards have not really taken off as much, perhaps? Is financial inclusion a driving motivation factor for you?
For sure. And we're serving a segment of consumers that the banks have ignored or stayed away from due to excessive just risk aversion.
Got it.
I think these are customers that are credit worthy, right? They have, as I mentioned, they have salaries, they have incomes, and they have needs. And if you're able to manage their risk accordingly, then they're a very, very
But how do you assess risk in a situation where you don't know the consumer?
Yeah, so the typical consumer that is coming to us is buying a dress or a shirt, and so there is a real need for that particular product that they want to buy, and the size of that transaction is not that large, right? So most consumers, again, it is the law of averages. Most consumers are actually good actors.
Good actors.
They're there to make a purchase that they actually want. Right. If you take this further, we are looking at behavioral factors of these customers. What is the typical shopping behavior of this customer? Are they coming in and making a very large transaction for a product that they want to resell? That indicates certain risk or gives us certain risk alerts. But on average, consumers are using this for products that they actually need.
Got it.
It's a lot more discretionary spend, and so with that, we're able to assess the risk quite comfortably.
What do you think is the future for this industry as such? Like I said, you are a leader in this space. Tabby is a forefront, by far the largest in this region as well. What do you think is the future for BNPL or buy now, pay later here?
Yeah, I think just given the benefits that this provides consumers over existing form factors, I think this has the right to become the dominant payment method in the region.
Got it.
Previously, it was cash at 80% of e-commerce. The fact, we don't believe it's too far-fetched to believe that this could replace and become bigger than cash eventually.
Sure.
at over 80% of transactions in the region. Right, there is a real problem that this is providing, that this is solving for customers, and as such, the demand is clearly there.
Got it. Awesome. But a couple of last questions from me. Do you use buy now, pay later yourself?
I do, honestly.
What's the last interesting product that you bought?
So I'm just like you. We're giving Unas a lot of credit here, but I'm a big Unas fan, and they do a pretty incredible job.
They do. The selection is awesome.
Selection is great. Experience is great.
And the service is brilliant. I mean, like you said a little earlier, right? That's what differentiates folks as well. Like companies like you or Unas, for that matter, is all about service. The seamlessness and the experience of it all. So what was it that you shopped on Tabby or using Tabby? Anything interesting that people listening in might actually want to kind of take a cue from your behaviors as well?
So just did some shopping for my summer vacation.
Okay.
Needed a bunch of outfits for the beach, and Unas had plenty.
Okay, Unas it was then. Okay, that's where you and I will up again.
Exactly.
Unas, I should go back and talk to Unas as well about the fact that my team insisted that I should ask you a couple of more intrusive questions, for lack of other words. How do you unwind at the end of a long day?
Yeah, so I unfortunately there's a sadistic way of doing it and a non-sadistic way of doing it.
Okay.
The non-sadistic is I completely disconnect and I watch whatever football is on
Football,
TV.
okay.
the sadistic way is to reconnect to my work and start working again. So I try to do more of the former than the latter.
Good for you indeed. Good for you indeed. And if you had a superpower or superhero power, what would that be?
Maybe looking into the future.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Looking into the future. When does the madness end?
But when you spoke about sadistic power and switching off and such, how do you switch off when this is such an active, vibrant business?
Yeah.
How do you ever switch
Honestly,
off?
it's not easy.
You can't, right?
It's really not easy. You need to force yourself to do that. It can overtake you. Back to your questions on entrepreneurship, and it's not easy, right? It's such a fulfilling. It's such a fulfilling part of my life.
It is.
But at the same time, it is very difficult to disconnect, and the stress can overcome you if you allow it to. All right? So it is essential, and I think I just have learned to force myself to disconnect as much as I possibly
Would that
can.
be a bit of advice as well that you would talk to people about?
100%,
Switch off once in a while.
yeah.
But you also surround yourself with good folks. I've met with a few of you people, and your teams are really awesome.
They're great guys, right? And that's what allows me to disconnect.
To disconnect as well.
I'm very passionate about what we do, which makes it difficult. But surround yourself with amazing people, and you should have the luxury of being able to disconnect.
And I know you're my guest here today, but I must say this as well, Hussam. The folks I've engaged with at Tabby are all, and including you, are driven by something different. I call you guys missionaries. And I say missionaries from the perspective, and of course you're the visionary here as well, but missionary from the perspective of trying to change a lot of things as well. And you're changing consumer behavior, you're trying to change the manner in which the business operates. And we spoke about the playing in the light, playing in the gray versus playing in the gray. We spoke about playing a clean, seamless, experience-driven, financial inclusion, worrying about the credit underserved, all of which kind of stands out as being missionaries and people who are on this mission to kind of change things.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a hallmark of a success?
I think that's very true, right? The leadership team has been with Tabby essentially from the very beginning, right? We've and all of these are people that I met completely through through meeting others through a network. These are not people that applied for job postings or were brought to us through recruiters, and so they all deeply believed in what we were trying to build. Right? We kind of were pulled together. The universe pulled us together. I think because we all deeply believed in what we were trying to build, and I think a large part of the reason for our success is the fact that this leadership team has remained intact. We all have a very clear view of what we want to build, and we're all going towards that.
Good for you indeed. Thank you again, Hussam. This was as always brilliant engaging with you and talking with you. And today it was actually interesting today because for the first time actually I have a better insight into the way you think and operate as a business leader and as a visionary and as a leader of the industry over here, other than just sitting across the table in our negotiations that we had as well between Tabby and Amazon. But no, I must thank you indeed. This has been super illuminating. Thank you for your time, and I'm hopeful that folks who end up watching this take away a few insights at least from this journey of yours. It's been truly remarkable, and I do wish you the very best and Tabby the very best as well.
Thank you so much. You're very kind.
No, not at all. It's my honor to have you here. But thank you once again, Hussam, and brilliant as always.
Thank you.
Pum pum param pum param pum param pum 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 pum.